ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to the Godrej Interio in association with Healthcare Radius presents elevating user experience while leveraging hospital real estate. Hope you are all doing good and are safe. Before we start the discussion, I would request everyone to post your question in Q&A tab displayed at bottom of your screen. And if you wish to ask any question to the panelists by coming live during the event, you can do so by raising your hand, and my colleagues from Healthcare Radius magazine will get back to you. Patient safety is the foundation of everything that any healthcare organization undertakes, be it in their processes, infrastructural design, or equipment procurement. In this webinar, the C-suite of leading hospitals discuss how an ergonomic hospital environment can help improve efficiency and safety while lowering costs. To discuss more on this, we have with us today Dr. Mudit Saxena, Partner MD and CEO Ovum Hospital. Welcome, Dr. Saxena. Dr. Harish Pillai, CEO Aster India, Aster DM Healthcare. Welcome, Dr. Pillai. Dr. Sanjeev Singh, Superintendent Medical, Amrita Institute of Medical Science and Research Center. Welcome, Mr. Singh. Then we have Professor Dr. Sanjeev Bagai, Chairman, Nephron Clinic. Welcome, sir. And then we are joined with our partner, Sagnik Biswas, Head of Design, Healthcare NPI, Godrej Interio. And to moderate this session, a very dear friend, architect Shantanu Poredi, co-founder of Mobile Offices Architects. And with this, I give it over to you, Shantanu, to take over. And I think while we sit back and devour the session that is going to be there. So ladies and gentlemen, please please tune to me, and I'm sure you will learn as much as I'm going to. Thank you.
Thanks,
over to you, Shantanu. Yeah.
Thanks, Vibhor. Thanks all the panelists for being with us, joining us this evening. I hope we have an interesting session. We have some interesting questions and all related to the field that you all are experts in. So the success of a healthcare organization relies largely on competitive intelligence, market knowledge, and strategic planning. And I thought these are the three main points we'll discuss today's panel with. So we'll start with the strategic market research. So is this an important piece before we actually start planning a hospital? Is this of any value? Is this piece of any value? So I'd like to start with Dr. Bagai, if you can share some of your experiences with this piece.
Thank you for having me on this panel. So I think a very, very detailed strategic plan, including the market review as far as a risk-benefit ratio with regards to the competitive interest, what we call is wheel within wheel. So in a radius of 5 to 10 kilometers, beyond 5 to 10 kilometers, and in that area. So this would include minute detailing of the demographic profiling of the kind of population which stays, which mainly zeroes down onto the location of the potential hospital. It will include the paying capacity of that area. It would include the age band population-wise distribution of population in that area. What are the type of hospitals, clinics which exist, the number of beds which exist, the total number of ICUs beds which exist, what is the number of high-end equipment in that area, which is MRIs, CTs, PET scans, robotic surgeries, and so on. What would be the connectivity of that area versus the other zone areas? What is the doctor distribution in that area, and so on. So I think it's extremely important to see what the surface is and below the surface is. So very quickly, to give you a couple of lead examples, there are certain areas, let's say, for example, in Delhi, which have perhaps the highest density ratio to 1,000 population of MRIs and CTs, which is called as Hoskas area. Right now, it would be extremely brave and extremely foolish to put up probably the 35th MRI or a CT scan in a radius of 1.5 to 2 kilometers, because it will become more difficult to survive, and it's an overkill as far as the supply is concerned. So I think planning right from the number of labs, radiology centers, hospitals, clinics, density ratio with regards to doctors, the need gap, and what we are aiming at. So are we aiming at a multi-super specialty hospital? Are we looking at a small, mid, or large hospital? Are we looking at a large hospital, then with centers of excellence with various kinds of specialties and subspecialties? or are we looking at a specialty tower with a multi-super specialty tower? So I think we need to be very clear in terms of our vision much before we put pen on paper. And I think the investors are smart enough to understand that what kind of business plan they are looking at, what is the market surge, where you want to place your particular hospital. So what we call as the famous P's. One is product placement and pricing. So we must know what you're launching, where you're launching, and the pricing will be determined as towards the location and the competitiveness of the market.
Dr. Singh, you are also working on coming up with a large facility in Delhi. So have you all done a market research, or is it a market research that you outsource to a market research firm, or is it done internally? That means you have a set of doctors who sort of research internally and come up with what kind of business plan you want to come up with for your hospital.
Thank you, Shantanu, and thank you for having me in the panel. I think most of the very critical points were already mentioned by Dr. Bagai. So we fortunately or unfortunately fall in a very different sector. So we are a university teaching hospital.
Okay.
So we would follow some of the norms which are laid down by Medical Council of India or by the new National Medical Commission. So one is that, but then nevertheless, there is an investment in a new location, especially in an area like Delhi and NCR. So we did go through the feasibility study. We wanted to save money because we are a not-for-profit organization. We wanted to save money. So we initially got few hospital management students to initiate this feasibility study. And very soon we realized that it is not up to them because the bandwidth and the information which they need to seek in to have an appropriate business plan and appropriate strategic plan would not materialize. Then we definitely have outsourced this to a company who have done many of these feasibility study, and then we zoomed into a particular location. Now, because of our fitment, which is again a university teaching hospital, you require certain acres of land. So unfortunately, we explored Delhi and we explored Gurgaon, and we wanted somewhere around 130 acre because to have the nursing college and a medical college and the simulation center and a research block all in a medicity, you wanted that kind of an area. So it wasn't the location which the feasibility plan brought in, but they brought in what Dr. Sanjeev Bagai very, very rightly mentioned about the competitors analysis, about the people, the paying, the population, the pricing strategy. They interviewed a lot of customers from the resident welfare associations or from other societies to understand what is the disease profile, and they mapped it in accordance to a particular geography. And that is how we took that plunge into putting up a center at Delhi NCR.
Thank you, Doctor. It's really interesting to know that this is a very, very important piece. And I always wondered when we've done a few projects, they always laid a lot of emphasis in the beginning on the market research, which now I have a better understanding of. I think we will move to the next stage. Once we are sure about getting into a hospital project, we always talk about a project planning team. Yeah, and it's very well known and identified that the project planning team is actually a collaboration between the stakeholders of the hospital, the many departments of a hospital, and external experts who are consultants. And maybe an architect is one of them, but there are several others. And this forms a team and a collaboration. So I'm sure every hospital has a different constituent profile of their team. And I'd like to sort of ask this question to Mr. Pillai, Dr. Pillai. What is the kind of team that drives your projects in your hospitals? If you could throw some light on this, the project planning team.
Sure. Thank you, Shantanu, and also to Healthcare Radius for having me in this interesting panel discussion. To answer your question is that, why do you need a hospital? It starts off with asking that question, whether you're a doctor or a promoter, the rationale behind having a project in the first place. So both Dr. Bagai and Dr. Sanjeev Singh have given recipes for success. It's a very structured kind of an approach. But when it comes to team formation, uh, many we have seen where many people have wasted time in terms of investment, and also time is a bigger factor, that they've not got the stakeholders right to give inputs in the facility planning part. The market research will give you a lot of information on the type of hospital in terms of your specialty mix, clinical programming, your bed capacity requirement, and relatively to make it future proof. Because typically, when you do, like in the case of Aster, we do large format hospitals in size of 500 to 600 or even 700 bed capacity. That's our typical hospital size. So we usually do projects in a way that we face the project that phase one is usually up to 350 beds, and phase two can be maybe after 3 years of ramping up, when occupancy level touches about 70%, we start looking at talking about phase two. So the core team in that initial ideation stage will have the promoters. You will identify, if you're already a network of hospitals, then you will get your doctors on board to start brainstorming the ideation session with your architects. And a good architectural firm involved in hospital design will have a good team, not just the architect per se, but also the clinical programming experts. Mostly what we have seen is that doctors, based on their typical experience, like if you look at a guy who has come back from the United Kingdom, whether he's a surgeon or a physician, he has got a specific idea of how the space plan could be, which may not be practical in an Indian context. An Indian doctor, if he's coming from AIMS, Delhi, or CMC Vellore or SGPGI Lucknow, he has got a different mind space of how the design ought to be. So in our experience, we have realized after, we don't talk to one cardiologist, we talk to a bunch of cardiologists to get a fair idea. And there's an advantage that we are a network of 26 hospitals now spread across 8 countries. So we have a fair bit of experience that it can't be a cut and paste model that what works in one geography you can just replicate in another geography. That's just not possible. So this is the core team in terms of ideation to get the programming mix right. You also need to bring in experts in operations research, because on paper it looks fine, but the most critical aspect of efficiency in a hospital is your traffic flow pattern, your internal traffic flow in terms of horizontal and vertical traffic flow, whether it could be people movement, your staff, it could be patients, attenders, your clinical faculty, your support staff, your material supplies. All those things are extremely important in terms of location of your corridors, the size of your corridors, your elevator locations, the staircases, the fire escape zones. They are all very critical in terms of getting your queuing theory right through an operations research team. The next aspect of design part is, I would say, the engineering aspects, whether specifically the civil and the structural engineer for high-end imaging equipment, specifically for radiotherapy or to do with MRIs, for example. Then the structural engineers' inputs are very crucial in terms of location, along with the clinical guys and the operations research guys. Moving on, you also need inputs in terms of making a simulation of when you do your staffing model, like your HR teams. Mostly when architects design, they often make mistakes in terms of underestimating the staff accommodation in terms of your admin offices or your duty doctor's room, the nursing room, the pantry location. There are a lot of mistakes made. So you also need to have inputs from your functional heads. The engineering component is also crucial when you talk about your HVAC design. In Thanks to COVID-19, hospitals which are well planned and well designed, who follow NABH regulations or the Joint Commission regulations, they are fairly comfortable in terms of zoning of patients, right from your ambulatory care, emergency, and also your acute care clusters, to have that luxury of having negative pressure rooms and separation. Also, thanks to COVID-19, we realized the critical importance of fresh air changes, the type of air handling units which you are designed, your FCUs. So all these design elements, if you think through and invest time in planning, then life becomes easier on that. My last point is also because we are a private for-profit organization, it's very important that when you plan the capex, the kind of investments you're going to make, you have to also talk about life cycle maintenance costs post commissioning of the hospital. If you have a large footprint, then the housekeeping expenditure is pretty high, maintenance expenditure is quite high. Can you really look at smart technologies to incorporate from day one so that your utility cost is kept at an optimum space? So these elements, if you take part as part of the ideation and design stage, then you can really focus on the core purpose of your facility, which is basically patient care, and not really worry about other headaches.
Thank you, doctor. I think that was a class in design of hospitals. My next question is to Dr. Saxena. So, lately we've been looking at hospitals being very designed as efficient machines. And so the experience is becoming very, very interiorized. Whereas we look at architecture of healing being connected to nature. So one of the aspects is, are we moving far away from nature? Is this something that we are happy with? Or should hospitals still bring in that idea of healing with nature? Could you shed some light on this? Although there are some pros of having a completely interiorized hospital with, the pros, about the pros.
So thanks, Shantanu. Thanks for putting it across, and thanks, Vibhor, for having us all over here. I think some of the points which we were discussing yesterday also was this internalizing of the external environment inside, and how do the patients and the consumers react to that. I think that's very interesting, because the current kind of clientele which we are observing, which are visiting the hospitals, their aspirations and understanding is very, very different. It has really moved away from what we used to see earlier from a patient's perspective or from a customer's perspective. And the current generation of people, as well as the clients which are coming, they're very, very, they need something to be visually and aesthetically correct. And I think there's a lot of change which is happening in terms of how the hospitals are being designed now. And I think Harish put that point very well in the beginning, that this also is a cultural issue. It also brings up forth a lot of issues from coming from the point of view where you're looking at not only geographic regions, but also from what are the cultural issues at that part of country or that part of area. It also involves in terms of what you bring in. So of course we have this accreditation programs which does not allow, say, you would not be allowed to have plants or trees or flowers inside, because you will have issues with pollen and you can precipitate allergies and stuff like that. But apart from that, it also needs to be what Harish mentioned, is that it has to be, from operational point of view, you're looking at a long-term perspective, it has to be efficient, and it also has to be an operationally cost minimizing program. Tomorrow you want to build up a nice courtyard in the hospital and you grow trees, and then you have issues with birds, which we had at one of my hospitals.
Okay.
And the vents, we had to then go around sealing the vents, then we had to put up a blower. So unnecessarily the whole cost, and then the day-to-day maintenance is another big area which comes up with it. Natural lighting, of course, at any point of time when we had designed some of my facilities prior to this, we used to look into that through our architectural team, where we would say that as far as natural lighting can, so they would do shafts for us, and through which we would get access to not only natural light, but also ventilation. I think those are something which they would look forward to. And that, as I said, when we were talking yesterday, some of my clients were actually going to the extent where they said, when they can have something similar at the airport, when they would compare it to Changi in Singapore, they said, why can't we have something similar in hospitals? And of course, as I mentioned earlier, due to the various accreditation programs and stuff, where many of the doctors also and clinical fraternity feels that it can be a point source for allergies and dust allergen, that would be one. Other would be, of course, operational costs, which Harish also mentioned. But I think aesthetics do play a major role, and the current generation, which is growing more on the virtual world, things are very, very neat and proper in terms of how they see on the virtual text versus what they see on the real thing. So I think that's something which is slowly getting incorporated, and many of the newer hospitals are looking at it. Also, I think it also needs to align from functionality point of view. You need to understand where your food area is, where your food courts are versus where your cath labs are or where your patient areas are. And when you need to integrate with them, similarly, you need to bring the natural elements. Accordingly, you need to draw a line where you stop it and where you would allow it to come in. So I think those are the important issues which are being considered in the current sphere when we are looking at. Places which are looking into premium kind of places like we do premium birthing. You look at some of the hospitals which are coming up, which are in Calcutta. They go all across. They'll go the full yard. Make sure that the things are as per customers' choices, which you would find in some of the best hotels, which you find in like Sheratons and stuff, or you would see the 7-star or 10-star properties which have one-way glasses with nature on one side, whereas the person being totally getting the the privacy of being in his own or her place, but being in the wilderness at the same time. I'm not putting anyone in the boonies though. Yeah.
No, so I do see that you are striving towards nature, even though there are difficulties with accreditation and there are sort of hurdles, but still there is the hospitals like yours are trying to get closer to nature, even though it's a glass sheet, right?
Shantanu, you have a point there. I won't say it's a difficulty. I think it's a something which we need to be aware of, that we don't just get carried away in terms of making something more natural. But yeah, birthing is something. I come from the space where we do birthing, and birthing is a natural process. When we keep sitting together and have conversations, till date we have not designed a new way of birthing. We still do it the same old as human beings when they came to Earth. That's how we are still taking our birth. No one is coming through a nostril or through an earlobe. So it happens the same way now.
Thank you, doctor. That was interesting.
Shantanu, if you might permit me, just
Sure,
want
sure.
to
Hey,
add to
the
what,
floor is open, doctors, all of you. You all can
thank
jump
you.
in whenever.
Just wanted to add to what Mudit had just mentioned from the birthing space. So we have a chain of 13 hospitals in India spread across 5 states. The balance of the 25 hospital network is overseas, where the demographics really facilitate specialty hospitals like Women and Children Hospital, which is, and for example, we are the dominant player in Dubai, and Dubai is 100% insurance dominated. So as per insurance, the market is segmented into ABC category based on your socioeconomic cadre. So the way we have designed hospitals at the lower end of the market, we have a brand called Access, which is a no frills brand, where you can offer good quality care, but obviously with bare aesthetic. It's like almost like the no frills airlines, so to speak, in India. The middle brand is Aster, which is basically a functional brand, mostly secondary care, now going into tertiary care space. But then comes the boutique brand, which is Medcare in Dubai. It's a premium brand, which attracts most of the European expats and Arab UAE nationals. They go to that. And we do get a large amount of clientele in the women and children space. So we've gone into the specialty mix. Now, coming to India, in our large multi-specialty hospital, obviously we have strong women and children department. But then there is a compromise on aesthetics, because whatever you try and do, you can't give that exclusivity in a large multi-specialty hospital where you have this clinical program for women and children. So one new format, what we are experimenting, starting with our new hospital in Bangalore, which we are opening on Monday actually. That's our Whitefield, Aster Whitefield, is that in a multi-specialty campus, we are physically separating a birthing center. It's like a women and children hospital attached to a multi-specialty hospital, but it's a standalone block. So with this new experimentation, ideation, we are now trying to take it to our other campuses to have this standalone birthing center to give that kind of, because clearly the market demands that. So I just thought I'll add it to what Mudit was saying. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to move on a little bit more towards there are in buildings now. We're looking at smart buildings, and this has been a trend in all building types. And my question to Dr. Bagai here is, how is the health sector or the healthcare sector adapting to this? In your experience, what is the evolution now in this area?
Thank you. There are a couple of things which would perhaps impact all of us post-COVID era. And I think the stage and the platform of very large 800,000 beds, 1,500 beds hospital perhaps is passe now. I think we would require more, of course, high end, but more functional hospitals, probably in the range of 200, 250 beds across the length and breadth of our country. Going forward, I think also the hospitals will have to be designed in a manner which can integrate a host of other facilities, which we never actually even considered in our business plans till 2 years back. So just give you a very small example is very robust home care, right? Integrating sensors and devices to our command centers to have on-ground monitoring from home. These are things which we spoke of very frequently a few years back, but I think this is the time, otherwise there is no other time. But to come to your question directly is with regards to smart building, I would break it up into four different parts. A smart hospital or a digital hospital or an enhanced technology-wise hospital should deliver four outcomes. One, it should give you better clinical outcomes. Two, what we call as clinical excellence. Two is operational excellence. Three is enhanced patient experience. And four, very, very important is as far as your workforce staff is concerned, the doctors, the nurses, the technicians, and so on should be more comfortable, user-friendly, and of course have a better hands-on experience. Now, with regards to your clinical experience, there are two important points. One, with regards your patient care, are you giving better clinical outcomes which can be monitored? Now, in India, very, very surprisingly, none of the hospitals, I would definitely not expect the government hospitals to do it, but none of the private hospitals, either on the websites or on the internet in general or in niche areas of specialty wise, give the clinical outcomes. I think it should be made mandatory to publish your clinical outcomes, success, mortality, morbidity of each department over a period of, let's say, 5 years. There is no point in saying a particular surgeon has done 500 transplant surgeries in the last 24 months. The point is what happened to those transplant surgeries. I think it's important to break it down. Point number two is patient safety. I think we speak of it, and then once the hospital starts, very often a lot of hospitals don't concentrate on it. With regards to patient experience, it's patient comfort, it's patient user friendliness, specific areas for the disabled, for the differently abled, for the handicapped. I think even the rooms and the corridors should be so designed in which that category of patients can be looked after. Harish mentioned briefly with regards to women and children. I think that concept is completely ripe. I think it's the best way forward. Now, when you build departments, a lot of hospitals say we have centers of excellence. Now, when you say centers of excellence, it should actually define integrated in the hospital what your center of excellence means. Some people use it very loosely as institutions of excellence and so on. So I think there are given parameters and the hospital should be careful before you label a particular department or a specialty or a subspecialty as a center of excellence. It should meet that criteria before actually promoting it so. But just very quickly on women and children. So India, let's say, for example, has 35% of population in the pediatric age group, 0 to 15. And if you look at a women's segment beyond the age group of 18 going up to 50 or even up to 60, it's another 20-22%. So it's almost 2/3 of the Indian population. And to date, and I can say it with great amount of conviction, to date, there will not be more than a handful of hospitals only all over India which are comprehensive women and children. So when you say it's women and children, it should include the complete gamut of women care. It's not only birthing. So it's the routine care of women. Now, when you say women and children, a lady at the age of, let's say, 40 or 45 or 50 is having a laparoscopic surgery, should go into the women and children's section for that, not into the general multi-super specialty section, and so on. In pediatrics, there are 14 or 15 subspecialties. So does your institution offer all the subspecialties? Very often pediatrics is included as general pediatrics, neonatology, and plus or minus pediatric ICU. That's not it. You have pediatric nephrology, neurology, cardiology, and the full works, including transplant and things. With regards to the building per se, if you want a revenue, if you want return on revenue, if you want decreased hospital-acquired infection, you want a greater patient experience, you have to go the way which we call as a digital smart hospital. So it's integrating very, very smart building designs and integrating digital technology both simultaneously. Both these concepts have to be integrated very early at the phase of conceptualizing a hospital. A routine building should never be converted into a hospital, and a hospital, however good or bad it may be, cannot midway turn corners and say, I'm going digitally smart. So I think it's much better and cost effective if these ideas are integrated very early in the course of planning. When you talk in terms of digital smart technology, it's not very misconception is my hospital has electronic medical records, so it's digitally smart. No, there are almost 128 to 130 portals beyond a very robust hospital management system, which will actually classify you as a digital smart hospital. So it should be something like smart talking rooms. It should be speech to text, text to speech. It should be minimum touch as far as the patient care is concerned. It should be remote monitoring of patients even within the hospital. It should be less walk time for the doctors and the staff and including the patients. It should be a better technology use to look at specific areas. Let's say pediatric surgery. You know that these people are going to be 350 to 400 kg plus. Do your OT beds are functionally strong enough to give you 18 different automated positions during the course of the surgery? Is your simple OPD layout large enough with a room size to cater to these patients? Does your door allow that person to come in with an attendant? So these are things which you have to integrate very early on. Is your examining stool strong enough to hold the weight of that patient? And so on. So I think technology should be integrated very early. We have to integrate specific areas of spacing for different department command centers. So if you're looking at using sensors and devices in a big way, and you want home care and remote monitoring in a huge way, you have to have the back office space to monitor that and the required skilled manpower to monitor that. But I think if you're looking at a return on investment, we've done this study even in the new hospital in Delhi and in other places in India, you get almost 18 to 18.5% return on investment on digital smart technology. So very quickly, just last 1 minute, as far as a very good, robust 500-bed hospital, which has an excellent platform of IT care and a very good, robust hospital management system as far as the technology is concerned, HIS is concerned, your routine expense would be around anywhere between 5 to 8 CR, all inclusive as far as your hospital IT is concerned. Now, if you enhance this and go up to 15 and beyond or 17 and beyond, depending on how advanced you want your hospital as far as digitalization is concerned, your difference is not actually an expense. It's actually an investment because it gives you a better return on investment than even clinical care. So I think more digital you go, you have three major advantages. You have lesser use of manpower. There's enough published international studies in which 35% decreased use of manpower. So therefore you save on from your HR roster. Point number two is it saves water, it saves electricity, it saves power, which gives you about 14 to 15% saving as far as your top line is concerned. And three, most importantly, is it gives you lesser rate of hospital infection. It gives you better clinical outcomes. There is a 50% better utilization of beds, including OT beds. Your A loss goes down by almost 2 to 2.5%. Your average length of stay, so your bed utility is better. There's a 42% decreased chance of hospital readmissions because of wrong diagnosis. And lastly, it gives you a better clinical outcome with lesser mortality, lesser morbidity. So I think this entire discussion should take place at the first meeting itself with the promoters, the project team, and the conceptualization with the architects. It's extremely important that however big or small your hospital may be, you must have a very, very robust technology use integrated early on. So all the sections which are important as stakeholders, doctors as medical, nursing as support staff, your patients as patient experience, your operational staff for giving you revenue, your marketing staff for driving sales, your technology staff, each and every department must be integrated in very early on to achieve this.
Thank you, Doctor. That was quite
Can I
extensive.
add a point, Shantanu?
Welcome, Doctor, please.
Yeah, I think what Dr. Bagai mentioned was bang on and it was very appropriate. I would like smart hospital should also be green and energy efficient. I think that focus should be there, and it using the renewable energies, using the efficient water resources, using all kinds of material and resources which are available, looking at indoor air quality. So it would be looking at rainwater harvesting, solar energy, HVAC systems per se would be extremely important. And when we are looking at this, the building management system and getting a digital information and manning it at the central utility plant would be extremely important. So patient care area is definitely the key, but as a smart hospital, being green, being efficient, digitally manning it and digitally recording and saving on the total outlay would be also extremely important.
Shantanu, I want to add one point to Dr. Bagai and to Sanjeev. One interesting facet which we are seeing in the past 1 decade is the impact of climate change. The monsoon is not what the monsoon was a couple of decades back.
Absolutely.
This kind of erratic monsoons, extremes of climatic change, I think hospital designers need to prepare for flooding. We've had umpteen stories of hospital disruption due to monsoon related floods in India. So that's also an element which designers need to plan, specifically when you ask that question of market research and location, right? How far are you from a water body, a river or a lake or whatever? I think that has been a critical part of your decision.
I think, it comes down to, the word smart being used right now came down to the first logical way of looking at things, first principles, water, land, soil, air. And now that we have technologies, we are trying to improve our environment. But always, I think the synergy of first principles with technology is the best way to move ahead.
Yeah. If Shantanu, if I can just add one point with permission of everyone.
Sure.
There's a big move towards what we call as I-suites as far as smart OTs are concerned, and what we call as smart talking rooms, including smart ICUs. So it involves a lot of technology and routine common sense factors integrated as towards the positioning of the bed, positioning of the OT monitors, and positioning of the television screens, having a voice over control, gesture control. So these are things which give practically a complete comfort zone for a surgeon to work in. And now you have what we call as a digital tracker hand technology, which you can actually give you a precision, which is an error is less than 0.0001, 501 away from the target. So let's say if you're doing a very complex base skull surgery for neurosurgery, which is endoscopic and things, you'll be probably as near into the target area which you are envisaging. And you have a screen of 8, 12, 14, 16, 18 monitors, and you can actually put one image superimposed on the other, and the computerized part would do the rest to tell you whether the Mets have increased versus the last 2 years, or they've shrunken, or there are any more changes, so on and so forth. So I think technology is going to become your backbone going forward. Very smart use of AI is extremely important. Even the doctors' apps are available now using AI technology. At a whiff of a hand, you can screen, within 20 seconds, your data is screened from almost 4 million articles from published peer-reviewed journals. So, you know what drug to use, what dose to use, are there any allergies, is there any contraindication, what is the pharmaceutical excretion of the drug, what's the half-life of the drug, what's your exact doses. Very often in not only in pediatrics, but all over in ICU cares, it is milligrams per kilogram per minute or per hour or body surface area. And the calculations of human errors makes a huge impact. So till about 10 years back, the third most leading cause of death worldwide was medical errors, human errors. Now, smart technology actually decreases it from 11% down to less than 1%. So I think using technology to give patient safety, decrease human error, making lesser calculation errors and better use of drugs as far as on ground, on the floor and in the ICUs is concerned. That's smart technology.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
I wanted to make a quick comment on Professor Bagai's, and absolutely he's right. But like I told you that I'm a publicly listed entity, right? So I have to face analysts every quarter.
Sure.
And one parameter which is very critical for us is your ROC, return on capital employed. And I envy my colleagues in Dubai and other markets who are able to afford the tier A HIS. Like they have the Cerners or the SAPs of the world. I just can't afford it in India because the reimbursement structure in India, like I have to look at the Aam Aadmi HIS, right? Because I need to survive. Who's going to pay? Nobody really bothers about what I have at the back end. Nobody's willing to pay me for that. So we have to. So one wish list, if you ask from a Indian provider's point of view, I just don't understand a country which has got TCS, Infosys, all these, the tech wizards. Why are we not able to produce a homegrown world beater in HIS? I just don't understand. We need it. We need the tier one, but at desi prices. That's what we want.
Sure, agreed. Yeah, surely.
I guess at a policy level, if there are benefits for the researchers or the IT people, there will be a product for you, I'm sure. But I hope somebody is listening to this discussion we are having, and you will have a product which is affordable. Yeah. So I want to move on to Architect Biswas. He is also with us from Godrej. And this question then can move on. But first, I'd like to ask him, healthcare has been now focusing on the two-tier cities in the country. And so the question really is there a paradigm shift we are seeing in hospitals? So with respect to the kind of furniture you all build, you all are furniture innovators, equipment innovators, are you all looking at the difference in which clients come to you and say, no, the hospital that we have in the city is very different from the hospital we have in the two-tier towns. So is there a new way of looking at this for you? Architect Biswas, are you here? I hope he's listening to my
question. So I've heard you, and am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shantanu, for having me here. And it was excellent listening to all the esteemed speakers, and I got a lot of notes taken also. So to answer your question, there are changes, but when we look at designing of products, industrial products, we consider there are two sets of users, typically two sets of users for us. On one side, we have the patients and the families of the patients who need to feel confident at the hospital to whom they're entrusted to take care of them. And the patient also needs to feel very confident in a care and comforting environment, as Dr. Bagai has also mentioned, so that the cure outcomes are much better. So that is important. But on the other hand, and this is also being stressed in many of the discussions being put forward by the esteemed doctors, that we have got a data where we found that a caregiver, a typical nurse, is walking around 7 kilometers per day to do his or her normal jobs. So 7 kilometers if a person walks, think of the amount of stress that the person is going through and the chances of different kinds of occupational and health hazards that are there. So for us, when we design, we typically try to balance the needs of these two different sets of users. And that's how the design of any hospital environment, of a healing environment, becomes very, very critical. Shantanu, you will appreciate this.
Yes, sure. I do.
Yeah. So then what happens is now I would like to, from here, I would like to go straight to a point which was mentioned by Dr. Pillai just before, that solutions they see. He somewhere he used the word they see. I would like to build upon that because that is something that touches a chord with all of us designers who are working in India. So you see what happens is the return on investments, even if we talk about the bringing in the nature, the importance of visual arts, which we all know in like use of color, use of form and aesthetics in the designing of spaces. What actually makes a lot of difference is the return on investments. So before, like for instance, to give you an example, the latest range of products at bed called Acura had come up with, we actually did a very user research on different parameters. Let me tell you, it is not just the hospital that we research. Obviously, the doctors are the first set of users, the caregivers are the first set of users. We also have to consider the needs of the patients. we also look at the Indian consumer behavior, the psyche, like when somebody is buying a mobile phone, I mean, what is the condition that he's having in his mind? It is not that India, it's a wrong conception to say that India prefers cheap products. No, India prefers value for money products. So that is what India is willing to pay for. And that the moment we understood this, we actually thought of having a product which can actually grow with the company. See, today when the hospital is investing into something, even if it's the smartest of all hospitals, there are several things which are unseen. Like, for instance, the change in the weather, coming up the new diseases like COVID, we never knew. So, I mean, how can the hospital be agile in terms of planning in future when such things could keep on coming? And the hospital investments that they're building into now needs to consider all these things in future so that it can adapt to these changes with the least bit of a problem, and the return becomes better. Okay, so that gives you a better cost of acquisition. So what we have done, for instance, we have got a product, let's say it's a manual bed, normal manually operated bed, which can go in your wards and recovery rooms. Tomorrow, if there's a need, you can actually build on the same bed and not replace it by a bed and make it into a motorized bed which can go your ICU. So, that kind of research has gone into it to make it. So basically what happens is you don't need to invest into a new bed, and it's a green product because you're not throwing away any parts. There are no emissions required to carry it in a transport in a different facility, do some extensive labor work on that, nothing. It is simply converted at the site. There is no downtime. The customer spend is minimum. So what I mean to say is not that the product, but I mean to say this is the kind of insight that we need to have while we are designing, that how we can build into the product at the design stage, that kind of value, which will mature and keep on giving the investments in the future. I think that is very well, I mean, made up the point made by Dr. Saxena, and I fully, so that is what I wanted to say. So there is a huge change in that understanding, to answer your sum it up, Shantanu. So there is a big bit of a change because things are right now in a very, in a state of change. So the requirements coming to us are coming from different directions, and there are a host of things that needs to be considered, and we try to make it as flexible in terms of design as possible so that we have a product, because we are typically product suppliers. So when we make the product or the solutions, we call it the complete solutions for birthing or for ambulation, whatever, for OPDs. We try to make it into a solution which will grow with you. I mean, it is not like a investment of 2001. No, it will grow till the time of the life of the product that we have designed. So that's typically what we would like to do. That is what I wanted to tell you.
Very interesting. You're talking about this whole idea of life cycle of things, so which is very important in the sustainability argument that we as architects discuss.
Yes.
But just taking this further about the two-tier cities, I'd like Dr. Saxena, you have facilities in different areas. Have you seen a difference in what you offer as services in terms of two-tier versus your metro services that you offer?
I think, Shantu, what I find here is, in terms of aspirations from a human being perspective, there are not much differences. Okay. In terms, if you ask a person whether he would like to travel point A to point B, and if there is a flight available, definitely all of them would prefer. It brings back to the major question which Harish posed, that how much of it would be affordability built into it. If they can all afford it, they would all like to have it. So when I look at a tier 1 or a tier 2 town customer, I don't see much of a difference in terms of his aspirations. Interestingly, if you look at the data which comes through online sales base, you will realize that most of the sales of online platforms, they are happening in tier 1, tier 2 towns and tier 3 towns, in fact, in India. If you look at major Diwali sales, major Republic Day sales, all these guys make more money when they're doing it in sales in something like areas like Gurdaspur or Bathinda and stuff like this, which does not feature as one of the top towns or metros of India. So I think there is a huge amount of Indian middle class which is sitting there. And if you look at the economic pyramid, almost about top 10% of the Indian population holds up to almost 30-35%, and remaining, in fact, more than 35 to 40%, and remaining middle class, which holds another 40% of the, and which is around 35 to 40% population. With an average annual salary of somewhere roughly close to about ranging from 50,000 per month to about 1 lakh per month, a household income. So if you look at from that statistics perspective, I see a huge amount of Indian population, great Indian middle class, which is sitting there, which has huge amount of aspirations. And that's the need which we need to service in right now. And when we are looking at building up facilities, I'm sure Harish would be able to, address that, because he has hospitals across India, and it's not necessary that they are only restricted to metros per se. They are in tier 1, tier 2 towns also. But in terms of the facilities, even if I look at an Apollo in Vijayawada or some of the hospitals which Aster has it in tier 2 towns, they're pretty good in terms of growth infrastructure point of view, in terms of service level. So in terms of infrastructure, layouts, aesthetics, pretty well done. I think what differs over there is maybe the service level outcomes, and then, the clinical practices, which can be a challenge at that point of time. And from a hospital perspective, as an operator perspective, what I see is that we can look at some kind of bridge courses where you understand what the customer wants. And based on that, you can upgrade these skill sets, whether it is nursing, whether it is clinical communication bit. These are the areas which we need to focus in these areas, because that's where they might be at a, challenge scoring levels in comparison to a metro. Otherwise, in terms of a product or a service point of view, they are pretty much at par, and that's what the aspirations are. We have seen this happening in when I was in my previous organization, and even the current organization. What I have built up in my something about 25-30 kilometers outside Bangalore, which is a kind of a semi rural or a semi urban center, I would say. There, when we started our hospital, I used to see people coming in two-wheelers, and rarely I would see a four-wheeler being parked, which was usually the doctors. Today, when I go there, there is not a single two-wheeler there. Most of the people are driving in Maruti 800s, and I'm not saying that these should be taken as a benchmark. What I'm seeing is that once we built up a hospital, the aspirations over there for those people was there. They have grown from their economic standards of a two-wheeler to a four-wheeler, and their footfalls into a branded product, into a branded hospital, is not only because of the branded product line, but they're also assured of a certain level of deliverable in terms of clinical competence, in terms of quality of service and service level. So like when you talk about birthing, which we were discussing previously, I would look at, when we design our birthing suites and stuff, we would talk about it's a happy occasion. So it's not, as I said, birthing is not a disease. It's a natural physiological process, just as any other physiology. And there we would talk of celebrations. So we would do the full cake cutting. We would do gift hampers. We'll decorate their cars. They'll put balloons and stuff like that. And that has nothing to do with a tier 1 or a tier 2 town psyche. Actually, when you're celebrating something, you celebrate it across India. Of course, I did do a little bit of change, because when we did that, initially people were very abhorrent to the idea of having cake. They felt cake was something which comes from a Western thought process, and it had eggs in it, so we will not do it. So we started doing motichur laddus. Okay, so we do a 1 kg laddu pack, and then we started doing that. So that's the kind of a flavor which we changed. And now again, the cake generation is back. So now cake generation is saying, no, can we have cakes also? So we do that. So that flavor always exists. And I think aspirations are across India, whichever part you are, whether it's tier 1 metros or tier 2. And technology, as well as I think the internet, as well as your the TVs and information various channels, have been a great bridge in terms of transforming and translating this information across the genres of people, both socioeconomic classes. So that has been quite a catalyzer, which has helped us to provide and desire, which has come up from the customer rather than being thrown upon by the service provider today.
Thank you. I really like the motichur laddu, because this time my daughter wanted a birthday cake for her 15th birthday, a motichur laddu. So I think I found some connect here with that motichur laddu.
Can I make a point, Shantanu?
Can I make a quick interjection with Mudit, please?
Yeah, Shantanu, I also have a point.
Yeah. I think it's interesting thoughts, Mudit. But having said that, all what we do in terms of flavor and patient experience and enhancement of care, going from secondary to tertiary, now quaternary and beyond, we should never forget the core structure of what we call as a stacking program or diagram of a hospital. So I think we must have the minimum number of percentage ratio of ICU beds. We must have the location of, especially in a women and children section, we must always have the NICU as close to the birthing as possible. We must have adequate number of beds for inborn and outborn. We must have the infected cases segregated from the non-infected cases and so on. Likewise, the flow of patients, right from the time the patient, especially let's say for women and children, the mother comes into birthing, how she goes post-birthing, how the baby is managed. So I think the support structure is extremely important, and I've seen a lot of hospitals compromise on the percentage of the bed distribution, trying to accommodate larger single deluxe suites, and then they cut down on the number of beds in the intensive care areas and so on. So I think that's very, very important to maintain a ratio of at least 20 to 25% of total number of hospital beds as ICU beds. Much will depend upon whether you're doing secondary care or tertiary care or quaternary care. But NICU, PICU, and so on must have a percentage distribution, which is an accepted norm. 1 in every 100 would require active and very, very intensive resuscitation. Approximately 2 to 4 of every 100 deliveries would require some sort of resuscitation, including ambu bagging and so on. So I think the support built-up structure, which is not seen from the outside, must always be there as a backup. The worst thing which you can have is the best hospital in the world, the best experience. We are about to cut a cake, and we are supposed to be distributing all the other kinds of sweets, and the baby crashes, which is a well-known thing. It can happen. It happens worldwide. So all your back office support structures must always be there. Do not worry about some of the ICU beds not being occupied, but don't reach a situation in which a small baby or a critical adult needs a bed and that bed facility is not there in your hospital. Thanks.
Yes, Dr. Pillai and Dr. Singh, both of you all, I think, made a...
Oh, I'll be after Sanjeev. Sanjeev,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
Oh God, I wanted to say I'll be after Harish. So I wanted to make a very quick point. Well, the very first question about market research, when we were looking at this area of Faridabad, politically, it was an industrial town, and politically it has been completely killed. But still, there are 142 industries which exist, which has a turnover of 10 crores to 5,000 crores. So to answer to your question, is there a market available, and do they have the same aspirations of a good hospital? The answer is yes, because that's the market research told us when we were before coming to Faridabad. The only thing is they don't have trust, and they don't see competency available in their location. So they reach out to a metro. So what do we do if there are only 2 neurosurgeons available in 7 states of Northeast? So if the skill sets are available, if competency is available, if there are good hospitals, I think even in tier 2 is going to be a resounding success. Dr. Harish.
So I just wanted to, based on what Mudit said, right? I just wanted to give some live case studies. I'll just say 3 case studies in the case of Aster. One was we decided to be Sanjeev's neighbor in Kochi because Amrita is just next to this property. So because Sanjeev is there, we couldn't be humble, right? I mean, Sanjeev is like a giant pahalwan who's there, Amrita. So then, and we have almost 7 large, very good hospitals in Kochi, and it's a tier 2 city. But what was our entry? Because when we started this project in 2013, Aster was an unknown brand in India. No visibility. Nobody knew. Somebody in Dubai knows, of course, Aster, but in India, nobody knows Aster. So this was, at that point of time, the single largest investment on one site for a hospital. It was 700 crore investment for a 675 bed quaternary care center. That is a kind of commitment. So the strategy adopted was basically to be like the Vellore of Kerala, to give also a superlative experience, because we had data not only about morbidity and demographic changes in the state, but also outbound. In spite of excellent facilities in Kerala, a lot of outbound traffic was happening to Chennai, to Bangalore, to other cities for complex procedures. So that was a very good insight which we got when we decided to go with Aster Med City in Kochi. Now, when we look back, we are pretty happy at the detail, the granular level insight which we got from the market research, and the way we went and launched the hospital, not just for infrastructure, but in terms of technology. It's a 7.8 million square foot property on a 40-acre campus with a 1 kilometer riverfront, and it doesn't feel like a hospital. So we were the pioneers, I would say, in India to look at an architectural concept called therapeutic design. Can a hospital facility accelerate the healing process? So all the rooms of the hospital actually face the river. You see the Chinese fishing nets. We have looked at the importance of natural light, like the speakers before me spoke about. All the intensive care beds have got natural light flowing into it. So the circadian rhythms are totally preserved in that phase. So that is case study one. Case study two, which I would say was a failure where Aster was concerned, was we have this 600, we have, this is the hospital I'm referring to is in Kozhikode, where we have India's first NABH accredited hospital, MIMS Kozhikode. Now it's called Aster MIMS Kozhikode. So when it was a highly successful venture commissioned in 2001, when they decided to have a secondary care hospital in a town which is called Kottakkal. This in our category, it will be tier 4 or tier 5, I suppose, in that parlance. Kottakkal is well known for its Kottakkal Arya the Ayurveda setup, traditional Ayurveda. So at that time, the vision was a hub and spoke model where you have the flagship hospital in Calicut, but you will create a secondary care hospital there. It is an utter disaster, let me tell you. You can talk about market research, all those things. It is an utter disaster because of the paradigm of the management at that point of time. The paradigm was that you will create this hub and spoke model and they will act as feeders to your main hospital. But what was the community in Kottakkal expecting? They thought that, okay, MIMS is, everyone knows about MIMS in that part. Okay, now MIMS has come to my neighborhood. So for anything, I'll go to MIMS. When they realize that it's a secondary care hospital, they'll pack you in an ambulance and send you to Calicut. That's it. Within one year, you could not meet the expectations of the clientele there. So then it took us a hard 7 years, honestly 7 years. Then we all got involved to completely change and rearrange the strategic paradigm of that hospital. So we said, forget the hub and spoke model. This will be a standalone facility. So this is case study 2. My last case studies are youngest baby, which is in Kannur. Kannur is north of Calicut, where we decided to put a 350 bed unit. So the usual, it's a good multi-speciality hospital, but looking at the parameters there, we had a certain investment paradigm per bed, what we put there. But we never expected the kind of demand, which this is in my professional experience of 25 years, my only experience where a hospital is broken, EBITDA broken in 3 months. I never had that experience before. And I have no beds. Honestly, no beds at all. And I've never seen a hospital which is ramped up. And now within 1 year, we're talking about phase 2. So, there is a limitation also for market research. So that's what I wanted to say, the 3 case studies. Thank you.
Just a point here, Harish. If you remember during our college days, there was always a live example when we used to look at Medicity Medchal. That was one of the first hospitals which we saw being built outside on outskirts of Hyderabad, which had a lake and a built-up of nature walking into the hospital and how it would elevate the experience of healing. And in fact, I thought that experiment, that hospital was before time at that point of time. And it's a wonderful property. We used to make trips down there. You on Apollo and me on behalf of ASCII, we used to do all that. And it's a wonderful experience. And I think, Shantanu, that's very important that you be aware in terms of that you also make a strategic call. You also need to understand what time you are doing it, what the consumer is expecting out of you, and when you are taking that call at that point.
Yeah. So, I had many more questions, but I will not bring up those questions because I think we've run out of time. And I'd like to say that it's come a nice circle around. We started with the whole idea of market research. We come down to aspirations in 2-tier, 3-tier towns and these good experiences and case studies of some wins and some losses. But everything is a learning, of course. And for me, everything has been a learning today. So it's circled around quite well. And I really think everybody who's been on this show watching it has learned something out of it. So I'd like to sort of say thank you to all of you all. And hopefully I will give it back to Vibhor if you want to take over to conclude.
Shantanu, so this is Vinita Bhatia. Thank you everyone for this amazing and enlightening
Do we
session.
have more time? Do we have more time? Because I have more questions. You have to.
We do have a bit of time. In fact, there are several questions that are flooding our inbox.
Okay, okay.
And I was hoping that, I could take this opportunity to address those questions because I'm
Please,
sure.
please do, please do.
Fabulous. So I'm going to take it one by one. Dr. Pillai, this is a question for you. One of our participants wants you to elaborate on the asset mile mannequin model for the projects. Could you take it over?
Yeah, so Aster got listed in the stock exchanges in February 2018. So if you look at our approach before listing, pre-listing, so now we talk about pre-COVID and post-COVID. So in our case, we talk about pre-listing and post-listing. So pre-listing, the assets were completely owned by Aster, specifically in Kerala. The land, building, everything is owned by us. And we really never thought about ROC as an important parameter because we were in a growth and an expansion phase. But after listing, we realized that, the markets are also looking at, very important for the markets to look at ROC as a component. So all projects beyond Kerala has been asset light. So we have asset light in multiple, for example, the two hospitals in Bangalore, we have in Hebal and JP Nagar. These are quaternary care centers where we have a partner. The land and the building belongs to the partner, but these are greenfield projects. The Hebal project is a hybrid project because it's a much older facility. We can't really go and change the structure, but we had a lot of influence and inputs with regards to the interiors, the look and feel, and also the kind of modern, like Professor Bagai had talked about in terms of the theaters, intensive care unit, those things we have gone and put up in Hebal. But in the JP Nagar facility, it's actually a greenfield project where we could influence the design and the space planning from day one. So that is there. So typically for these projects, we have a lease going up to almost 40 years. And so it doesn't sit in our books. But now there is a new complication. The new complication is what we call as the INDAS standard, the new accounting standard where even if you have a lease agreement, it will sit in both the balance sheets. Because earlier we are trying to say, make it our balance sheets light, but now life has become a bit more complicated. So we are trying to figure out how do we overcome that kind of a hurdle. That's another part. The third concept, which I think many promoters are looking in India, is called the zero budget concept. The zero budget concept is you don't have any money in your pocket. Basically, you're a pauper, but of course you know how to run hospitals and you have this manpower available. So what you do is that you use your charm, your persuasion, your brand equity to convince a promoter to give you land and build a structure based on a specific IRR, internal rate of return. The good news for all of us in health sector is COVID has actually hit a lot of developers the hard way in the sense that the earlier cash cow for the real estate was IT spaces, right, across the country. But now work from home has dampened those enthusiasm and those business models, and they're beginning to consider a more conservative IRR for healthcare because healthcare is a sunrise kind of an industry. So we find interest from real estate guys who are willing to put custom designed hospitals there. And then on the other side, equipments, you talk to large equipment companies also to go on an asset light model. So here in this kind of a structure, because you are who you are, you're able to get these partners together. Absolutely zero investment from your side. You only provide manpower and management know-how. So that is the third degree which I'm seeing happening in India, which is called the zero budget asset light models. I hope I'm clear in that explanation.
Yes, I think you have been pretty, clear about it, and I hope our participant got what he wanted. So the next question I have is for you, Dr. Bagai, and one of the participants wants to know: is there a benchmark on the hospital size per million population or every 5 kilometers square area to cater to?
Actually, the need gap at the present moment in India is huge. In terms of number of beds per thousand population, India is about zero point 0.7 to zero point 0.8 versus US is zero point 0.4. There are some countries like Germany and Japan which are crossing 3.5 beds per thousand. So we are at zero point 0.7, which is about 1/4 to 1/5 lower. The sad thing in India is that anyone can put up a hospital anywhere, and there are some areas which don't have a hospital for the last 75 years, and it doesn't look likely that we'll have a hospital in those areas. So unless and until we don't percolate outside metros, we will not get a penetration into the areas where we actually need healthcare. But as far as the question is concerned, we should not have an overclustering of hospitals in one given area. A classical example is Gurgaon, which has perhaps the highest density of patient beds per thousand population, I would safely say anywhere in Asia. And then it brings a lot of practices which pull clinical medicine at tangential views. There is overpulling and overpricing of the medical staff. There is horse trading of nurses, doctor teams, and so on, which brings about a lot of unhealthy unpleasantness. So I think there should be a rational view as to how many hospitals can come up in given areas. I'll give you an example. Let's say, for example, in Australia, you are given a super specialized degree, either a fellowship or a postdoctorate qualification for a super specialty, if you are going to practice in an area where the number of surgeons or specialists of that branch are lesser. So I think it's not free for all in most countries. I think we need to be more rational. Try finding a very, very good high-end endocrinologist in the interiors of UP. Probably you will get a zero. Look at certain areas where you need a cardiac surgeon, probably not there. If you look at a particular type of ICU care in certain areas in India, not there. So I think we need to relook at the distribution of hospital beds. We need, of course, more number of hospital beds. There's an old saying that for the next 20 years, if we build 200 hospitals every year of 200 beds each, we will then cover the deficit, not the ongoing requirement, just the deficit of the hospital beds requirement in India. So I think we need more number of beds, more equitable distribution of number of beds, and the type of beds. Like I said, we have almost a 30 to 35% shortage pan-India of ICU beds. That's unacceptable. And I think COVID has opened many people's eyes, and I'm sure the decision makers are really going to look at it. I said this in the early part of my discussion. We don't need 500,000, 2,000 bed hospitals. We don't need very, very large, humongous structures. We need more functional hospitals, 200 to 250 beds in and around outside metros.
Thank you, Dr. Bagai, and I do hope that, like you said, the administration will take focus on this, and there is a better spread of beds and hospitals also across India. So I'm now going to take this on to Dr. Singh. So here's a question for you, Dr. Singh, by Mr. Raman Krishnan. He wants to know how much importance is given to lighting in healthcare facilities. I mean, is it important at all? Because he feels that lighting is just another electrical fitting. What is your opinion?
So I was, before building this hospital, I was also of the opinion that lighting is another fitting. And there was a lighting consultant who came in and who gave a big presentation saying that it is so important. And I told him, if you have to choose a hospital, do you choose a hospital because there are good doctors, there are good patient outcomes, there are good patient-centered care, or there are good lights? I think the focus definitely needs to be the delivery, which is outcome. But I think the lighting again plays a big part. I would like to break it into two. One, what Shantanu was mentioning, natural lighting is extremely, extremely important because that's therapeutic, as the other panelists have said. And second is the artificial lighting, which is also, again, it is important from patient safety perspective. It is important from, again, therapy perspective. It is important as a good interiors and good design perspective. And there are various kinds of lighting which is all available. It depends really upon your kitty, but it plays a big role. And I think a lot of importance needs to be given. It is just not an electrical fitting.
Can I just come in for a second here?
Sure.
Couldn't agree more, Sanjeev. I think lighting is important, but beyond the aesthetics of natural light, of course, for various other reasons and good lighting system per se, I'd like just to drive home a couple of very important points. When light fittings are actually being designed, they should be of a particular height, particular voltage, particular amperage per bed, especially near the ICU beds. The location and things are extremely important. The worst mistake which all hospitals, especially in the wards and ICU, is to have extension boards. It's a recipe of disaster. You try to put in too much of load in a particular area and you land up in short circuits and then hospital fires. The second thing is with regards to the light, especially in the ICUs and in the OTs. ICUs, especially when you're doing on-ground and emergency procedures, you need something to avoid what we call as the zero area. Zero area is where the glare comes and your vision goes for a toss. So I think the lighting of the ICUs need to be very, very astute so you can do on the bedside procedures. And OT lights are a complete different gamut. We can take hours to discuss that. OT lights are now reflecting lights. There are also lights which actually give you different colors and highlight different metastases with different light colors. So I think the lighting technology is completely changed and enhanced in the last 5 years. And it's extremely important that the healthcare architects be completely in tone with it. The project management team must be very aware of it and sit and discuss with the vendors each and every line item. A lot of things are not actually read into when you're ordering, let's say, for example, OT lights. So please go through the exact dimensions. These days we have OT lights which actually interface with each other. So you can actually have reflection within the peritoneum in the darkest areas of the abdomen, which can actually give you remote access either through robotic or non-robotic surgery. So I think lighting is would perhaps become a cornerstone going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bagai.
Just like to add on that aspect of lighting. I mean, lighting is not generic when we design it for a hospital. So what we do is in the beginning, we create something called a room data sheet. And a room data sheet actually has information or data about every aspect of each room. So if you have a hospital which has 1,000 different rooms, you would have 1,000 different room data sheet. And lux levels or lighting is one component.
Yeah.
And each of the rooms have different requirement of lux level. So at the end of it, if you want to just read on a table, which is a work table, we know it is 400 lux or 350 lux. But when you have to go into an OT, it will be 5,000 lux. So each room has a different set of data sheets with the lux level. And at the end of the day, when we also occupy a hospital, we go and check with the lux meter if we achieve those lux levels as per our room data sheets and see the performance. So I think it's very, very scientific. It's not done very casually and said that this is adequate and that is not. So there is a data sheet that gives you all of this information.
Just very quickly, in fact, the cutest thing came in actually is in neonatology. About 15, 20 years back, we realized a lot of children who were coming out of recovered from really bad and disastrous courses in the NICUs for weeks together, either on a ventilator or other procedures and things like that, had a lot of visual problems in terms not of only ROP, which is retinopathy of prematurity because of excess oxygen use and prematurity per self, but they had a lot of visual acuity problems. They had squints, they had differential axis, reading disabilities, and a lot of that is now related to very intense hardcore lights which were shining onto the small babies' faces and eyes. And now for a long time, for the last 10, 15 years, they have small little glares. So the newborns you will see wearing small little cotton sunglasses, so to say, is to protect the eyes. So adequate lights, not too much of light, but correct light in terms of flux, location of sockets, OT lights is different, ICU lights are different. So I think a lot of planning, a lot of systematic methodology, science goes into the lighting aspect. Yeah.
I want to add just one point, Shantanu, in addition to what the speaker said before that. Now we are seeing literature coming about of the mental health status of healthcare workers. The kind of time which we all spent within a hospital setup and the kind of morbidities and mortalities we are exposed to, it takes a heavy toll. Many of us don't articulate it outside, but we internalize these things. So lighting is a mood elevator. The shade of light, the
Absolutely.
type of light what we use, it really helps to maintain at least status quo where mental health is concerned. So it's a very vital and integral part of hospital design.
I agree with you, Doctor, here, because now it's bringing together of what we talk about visual therapy. I mean, 10 years ago, visual therapy was a small strip, but just now we're doing a hospital. Now we're able to do 5 meter by 10 meter or 15 meter panels. So you're able to create immersive environments where lighting, backlit environments with flex on it, is creating a room where you can bring down anxiety levels. And if you're going under a machine, you're always anxious of what's going to happen to me. But if you create an immersive environment where it is soothing, obviously it's internal, but light with graphics is able to do that. So this technology of lighting is changing, and it's going to immensely affect or help patients.
Absolutely. In fact, Shantanu, the real basis of having the virtual rooms now in the new MRIs and CT suites
Yeah.
are actually based just on that. So all literature now, which has been published in the last 4.5 years, shows lesser anesthesia time, lesser anxiety,
So
especially when you're doing very sensitive procedures which are related to the patient's heart rate. So when you have lesser anxiety, lesser fear, lesser effect, emotional input, your heart rate is at a much lower level. You require lesser sedation. Your post-procedure recovery is much better. Your artifacts are lesser. So I think light is something which is hugely neglected, let me say, in the last 20 years, but getting its prime importance, which was much overdue right now. Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right, Dr. Bagai. This is an element that has not been taken very seriously. Hopefully, we'll have another webinar shortly to address that particular topic.
If I may add, the same thing is with sound.
yeah.
No one speaks of sound, the reflection of sound, the reverberations, the acoustics. I think that's another very, very important part overall in hospital design.
Fabulous. So I'm going to move this forward because we have an international speaker who has asked a pertinent question and he wants Dr. Saxena to address it. So here's on to you, Dr. Saxena. Can you highlight some person-centered care scope and practice guidelines in the Indian context, and especially shed some light on design element and the healthcare outcomes?
Shantanu, I'll beg your leave, please.
Yeah,
Excuse
yeah,
me.
sure, doctor, not a problem.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think in terms of guidelines from, can you just repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Sure, sure. So the question was, it's in two parts. The first part of it was, can you highlight some person-centered care scope and practice guidelines from the Indian context? And the second one is also, could you speak about the healthcare outcomes when it comes to the design elements?
So I think the healthcare outcomes in terms of design elements, I think part of it has been addressed in our previous conversation, but I'll like to put a stress on that too. Coming back to in terms of specific, in terms of Indian context, in terms of whether it is, so there are some issues which are related to cultural practices which needs to be addressed. Like if you look at the Middle East perspective, when I was working there in terms of with the hospitals there, we used to see that there would be separate waiting lounges, separate areas which would be addressed. Similarly, like when we look at our scope, and especially if you're looking at birthing, and I think Dr. Bagai also mentioned it, when we're looking at pediatric and mother and child, our areas, our hospitals invariably would recruit a gender bias, which would be mainly women nurses being recruited. They would be addressing the women health, and that's a kind of something, an approach which becomes very easy for a patient, unlike having a non-gender bias where you would say that I will get male patients. Even for pediatric age groups, the softer element which comes with a lady nurse being there has a different aspect, both in terms of the acceptability from the patient as a child as well as a woman. And invariably, we have also seen when I was working with the multi-specialty as well as an onco center, we used to find that if we were doing any surgeries which involved women, they would not be very comfortable if male nurses would be deputed there, especially if you're doing breast onco surgeries and hysterectomies or something like that. They would always, so these kind of cultural issues do come up in terms of how you are having them. Though there are no guidelines on this, I think it's more of SOPs which are being derived from the local and the regional flavors which come with this, as well as the customers or the patient's expectations. We have, as I said, when I was working in my current organization, in the same vicinity, 25 kilometers outside Bangalore, people are very abhorrent to the idea of having egg in their food, and we have to replace cakes with laddus. Similarly, kind of flavor does exist when in the patient. In terms of the best practices which can happen when we're talking about specifically visual therapies and stuff, I do remember like when we in my previous stint with the oncology chain where I was working with, we had to do special programs for for my onco care nurses. And you would be surprised in terms of the kind of therapy treatment they underwent, which was both visual. We were using visual therapists for that, and she made them undergo sound and audio recordings and audio, music therapies and visual therapies, art therapy, wherein there was a huge amount of pent up emotions, which Harish was also mentioning previously. And what he was saying is absolutely right. They were like pressure cookers which would burst open, and they had a huge amount of emotional carry baggages which they were carrying with them, and the trauma which was there. As a result of which, I am still saying that we are very elementary in terms of putting this as a protocol among all our healthcare workers. But from HR perspective, we do a little bit of exercises which would be involving, communication and involvement in terms of getting them doing some kind of out of the box thinking, out of the working out of the routine workplace environment, changing that, and then making them uh, move a step forward or a little bit outside the box. But as such, putting it as a protocol doesn't happen. In fact, when you look at this, which we can learn is from other industries, which I think are far better, where the workplace environment is pretty well balanced, especially when you look at Google's and other, Wipros and other places, or Microsoft, or maybe IBM, where you have a phenomenal work place, which where you have the huge amount of freedom where you can work around, especially in high stress jobs. And I think healthcare is equally stressful. So I think in India, we still are looking at that. And healthcare can learn a lot from some of these new developing centers, which are mainly from, say, the new emerging business houses like Google and other places, workplaces.
Vinita, I have just two comments also to add to Mudit. So one is, of course, first one is tongue in cheek. In my earliest days in Apollo Hyderabad, when I was the assistant manager of front office, I realized that one hot zone where there's so much of negative emotion is the billing area, right? When the patient is discharged and they have to go and pay the cash, whole lot of issues there. So because I had the freedom to make some changes there, so we managed to convince management that time to redesign the entire billing area, and we also appointed a lady as the billing manager with a nice sari and all that, and it created a dramatic impact in the kind of discussions which happened outside. And ever since, in all my hospitals wherever I go, I try to ensure that the billing manager is always a lady, and the billing room is actually one of the most comfortable rooms ever to make make someone relax when they come there. So that's my tongue-in-cheek comment. Something on the serious note, which I wish that architects in India would pay attention to, is the importance of proper bereavement, specifically in the mortuary design.
Yeah.
We find that we are so sometimes we are so insensitive that the morgue is designed in such a way that it's actually morbid, to go into the morgue. I had the good fortune when I was a faculty in the Institute of Hospital Administration in Hyderabad to take my students to different hospitals in India. And one of the best designed hospitals where sensibility of the bereavement area was in Triple M of Dr. K.M. Cherian, which I saw it in Madras those days. A beautiful multi-faith prayer area, which is so soothing and so, it's almost like a meditative experience where you can grieve in comfort. And I think this is a critical and the sensitive elements where architects in India need to really pay the attention. And same thing in your intensive care and your OT waiting areas, where people are so anxious. We need to have, and we are a culturally attuned and a very religious society in a way. So we need to also create that kind of spaces for the multi-faith area for patients who they are next of kin and loved ones in an operating room or in an intensive care bed. And I think that will be an important facet of hospital design. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pillai. That was a very interesting perspective of, providing soft power at the most traumatic and the most difficult part of the hospital. I think that's something everyone should look at, not just healthcare institutions. And thank you, Dr. Saxena, also for answering the question. We have tons of questions more, but I think it's time for us to wind down this particular webinar. I'm going to hand it over to Bibor to give his concluding remarks.
So I think firstly, a very big thanks to everybody participating. I think they're really enlightened to hear this conversation, and I think 1.5 past necessary. So much to learn, so much to very interactive session, and as we can see, lots of questions. So audience, don't worry, we will try and get you the answer this soon. And I think our next issue will have a complete detailed coverage. So I want to thank each and everybody, and thank you once again. And I look forward for more meaningful and credible platforms like this, where we can engage and make sure that the audience gets the best out of us. So thank you from all of us here at ITP and Godrej Interio for being a part of this webinar. Have a good weekend, and thanks again once again.
Never realized that you could do it while driving.
Yeah, so I'm not driving. I have to just get it. So there was a kind of a gap, but I'm
Fantastic.
Good one, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harish. Thank you, Mudit.